An online survey by a firm called Christian Research once asked the question, in your school nativity play, did you play the third sheep or the angel right at the back? Did you always want to be Mary or Joseph, but end up operating the switch that turned the star on and off? The answers suggested that most adults and children remembered longing to be chosen to be either Mary or Joseph, and still resenting it at some level that they'd been turned down. Speaking personally, I actually did get to play the Virgin Mary because I was the tallest in the class, but I ended up bumping into another character on the stage, having a terrible nosebleed and being obliged to retire halfway through. But many who answered the survey felt that in their school, the role of Mary always went to the prettiest girl, and that of Joseph to the quietest or best-behaved boy, and they wondered what this said about the society they had grown up in. At the St. Mary Abbots Church Nativity this year, the enterprising director selected a girl to play Joseph and a boy to be Mary, precisely to shake up these traditional and maybe rather stifling roles, and to remind us that those present at the crib represent all of humanity. But the survey then asked adults and older children what part they would choose to play if they were in a nativity play today. Strikingly, very few of them still wanted to be Mary or Joseph, but instead they liked the idea of playing what was seen as the more interesting roles of King Herod or the grumpy innkeeper. But why do people stop longing for those central roles as they get older? Perhaps the most likely answer is that Mary, and supremely Joseph, in the traditional nativity play, can appear as fairly dull, two-dimensional characters, as one article suggested, maybe a bit goody two-shoes. The figure of the innkeeper is a much better and more entertaining representation of a human being, grumpy and self-orientated when his peace is disturbed, and yet capable of being deeply moved both by pity for Mary's situation and then by awe at the sight of the newborn baby Jesus. We see more realism in a character who can, like most people, combine elements of selfishness and generosity, humor and tenderness. And of course, the emotions and the conflicts which make both Mary and Joseph into much more real human characters stem from very adult questions impossible to discuss with 5-year-old actors. The BBC Nativity of 2010 portrayed the young Joseph as a far more complex character than he can ever appear in a child's version, and we were drawn with sympathy into his anger, his suspicion, and his fear at the extraordinary thing which had happened to his fiancée. But meanwhile, the actress who played Mary, Tatiana Maslany, wrote on her blog, "I loved that Mary wasn't written as a perfect saintly being, which had been my image of her growing up. In that script, she was very real, very fallible, a girl with innocence, confusion, and doubt, but also great courage and faith. She was complicated." Human beings are, of course, always complicated. Those two-dimensional goody-goody versions of Mary and Joseph in a traditional nativity play are, as the survey responses suggest, neither realistic nor particularly attractive. And one sometimes wonders if this dull, slightly boring image is being gradually transferred to Christ's church. If we only see and hear the Christmas story as a nursery school nativity play, how can we relate to the Christian story as we grow up? In fact, of course, the infant Jesus was born into a world not of cardboard cutout saints, but rather a world of harsh reality. His parents, as we have seen, were startled and confused by his miraculous birth. In the first few hours of his life, he encountered the effects of hardship caused by the occupying Romans' greedy taxation policy. His first visitors were shepherds who represented the dirty outcasts of society. And while he was still a tiny baby, the fear of a corrupt king who thought nothing of using violence against children to ensure his continuing power drove him and his parents to become refugees, seeking asylum in a foreign country. Far from being childish and two-dimensional, the world of the Nativity was not so very different from the world we see around us now. We too may see the damaging effects of unrestrained power or greed, of the divisions between rich and poor, powerful and powerless, and of all the uncertainties and anxieties of life. But in the baby Jesus, God himself became man, sharing our experiences and entering into the messy conflict and confusion of human life and emotion. And we, in return, are invited to bring our whole selves, not goody-goody, unrealistic selves, but all our genuine strengths and hopes and flaws and anxieties into the light of Christ at the crib this Christmas. If we come with open and sincere hearts before the Creator God who sees right into the depths of our being, we may be challenged to face our weaknesses and our fears, but we will also be enfolded in the peace and love of the redeeming God born among us in Bethlehem. Amen.